Infrastructure Australia has just released a report outlining a 50-year plan for infrastructure in Australia and proposing a number of reforms. Joining me to discuss his views on the report is Stephen Mackay, who's a partner at Addison's. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Now, Stephen, there are a number of reforms proposed by this report. Do they relate to specific planned infrastructure projects?
Well, Kate, the report's interesting because, as with previous reports, it does deal with specific projects, but I think for this report in particular, it has as its primary focus to encourage all of us to think about infrastructure differently. And that's really what the report deals with, right from the introduction, where Sir Rodney Eddington, the Chairman of Infrastructure Australia, identifies what he calls a profound disconnect between, on the one hand, a reluctance to have governments pay for infrastructure through increased taxes to get us to adopt a more user pays attitude towards our use of infrastructure, to have more government debt, even though Australia's government debt is low compared to many comparable countries. We have a reluctance to increase government debt. And we have a reluctance to do what the report calls recycling infrastructure, which many people will regard as a euphemism for governments selling off public infrastructure assets and then using that money to invest in new infrastructure. So on the one hand, you've got all these reasons why infrastructure is sort of difficult to fund, but on the other hand, we moan, we whinge, we bleat, we groan about the old, outdated infrastructure we have, how we don't have enough, how it's not the right type, how other countries do it better. So this is what Sir Rodney Eddington calls a profound disconnect. It's not the first time he's used that phrase either. He mentions it in his 2011 report, but in this report, in my view, it's front and centre. The report is really not so much about the individual projects, but encouraging everyone who reads the report to really seriously grapple with this profound disconnect.
Well, is there a geographical focus to this report?
Again, in relation to the projects that the report deals with that are scattered all around Australia, but the report has a vibe, if I could use that word, and the vibe is Asia. So Asia is mentioned 3 times in the introduction, and again we have this sense of Australia being in the Asian century. And when you finish the 2-page introduction, you get right into a section about Australia get ready, and it's pretty clear what we're getting ready for. We're getting ready for the global rise of Asia. So there's a lot of information in the report about Asia. In the year 2050, Asia will be the centre of the economic universe. Half the global output will come from Asia. In the Asia-Pacific region, between 2009 and 2030, the population will increase 6-fold. Food imports into Asia will increase by $470 billion between now and 2050. Australia's agricultural exports will increase 140%. Education exports from Australia are increasing, they're doubling every 5 years, and our customers are primarily China, India and Korea. All this means that our infrastructure needs to keep pace with this, particularly our transport and logistics infrastructure. So the report talks about road freight will double between now and 2050. Shipping will triple, rail and air will quadruple. So there's this opportunity with Asia, but also this concern that the report identifies that we just won't make the most of the opportunity that's presented to us.
So Stephen, what are the major reforms being proposed by this report?
Well, there are 7 major reforms, and look, it would take more time than we have to go through each of them. The one that's getting all the media attention is the proposal to establish a national infrastructure fund and have a more coordinated approach to the spending of money in that regard. The 2 that I like though are again this notion of recycling capital and just getting everyone used to the idea that it's okay for governments to take old, worn-out infrastructure assets that the governments may not do that good a job of running anyway, getting top dollar for them and investing that money in new infrastructure assets. That's the first thing. The second thing in terms of the reforms that really struck a chord with me was the very strong recommendation that regulatory approvals be condensed, be simplified. And the report gives an example of an LNG, a liquefied natural gas project, that had to get 390 separate regulatory approvals. It gives another example of an oil or gas project where a delay of a year in terms of approvals results in 20% less return on that project. So I think for me, this notion of recycling capital, and that's an okay thing to do, and just whatever governments can do to reduce not so much the cost of the approvals, but the time it takes, those two things alone would do a lot, I think, for infrastructure.
Stephen, there are a number of challenges facing infrastructure projects in Australia. Do you think the report adequately addresses all of those challenges, and are there any issues that you think the report might have missed?
Look, I'll be honest, I'm a fan of the report. I think the report's good. It's 150 pages, it's got 140 footnotes which detail all of the sources of data. It's a very detailed and well thought out piece of work. So my concern with the report is not that it doesn't correctly identify the challenges or make good suggestions about how to deal with the challenges. My real concern with the report is that unless governments do something to act on the recommendations, they just remain recommendations. It's just a report which, like so many others, is just a bunch of good ideas. And that would be a shame, because I think that it does identify the challenges, it does so in some detail, and I think it's got some really good suggestions as to how we can meet them.
And do you think we are likely to see a government response to the report at some time in the future?
Oh, look, I think we will, and I think that in many ways the Liberal Party has preempted that. And it's interesting, if you read Tony Abbott's sort of plan for action released a long time ago, released last year, you'll see that some of the things that he was foreshadowing are actually already dealt with in the report. So I imagine the coalition will be secretly very pleased, or perhaps not so secretly very pleased, with what the report has to say. In terms of the Labor Party, they've got a couple of things going on at the moment, so I don't really know what their response will be. I think that, particularly in view of the events of last Wednesday night and Kevin Rudd now reassuming the leadership of the Labor Party, if I was Kevin, I'd make a big deal of the focus of the report on Asia. He speaks Mandarin, he spent a lot of time in Asia. That's what I would do if I was Kevin. But look, I don't know how the Labor Party will respond, but I've got a fairly good sense that the coalition will be pretty pleased with what the report has to say.
We certainly will have to wait to see if the government does respond to this report. But Stephen, thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure.